They threw him out of the wagon to die in the mud at the edge of the forest. They tied his hands, they smashed his head, left for the crows. And only when he came to did he realize the worst. It wasn't his body. A 30-year-old engineer opened his eyes in the body of a dead young man who had been burned along with his family for hiding a cat girl. Crows circle overhead. They've already decided he's food. He groans and rolls onto his back. Gray. Low. Alien. Somewhere behind him, the wheels of a cart creak. The sound fades away. They'd left him here to die. He sits up. The world sways. Blood trickles down his temple. He brings his fingers to his face and freezes. A stranger's nose. A stranger's cheekbones. A sharper chin. The hair is longer than he used to wear it. The hands are thin, young, covered in white scars. But his hands were the hands of a man who had been hauling rebar since he was 18. His heart is pounding so hard his pulse throbs in his teeth. He tries to remember. The bridge. Night. Headlights in the darkness. A crash. The last thought before the blackness. The support held. He did well. And then mud and crows and unfamiliar hands. Panic won't help. He's an engineer. Engineers solve problems. Problem number 1. Untie his hands. The knot is shoddy. Whoever tied it has never worked with ropes. He pulls the loose end with his teeth, and a minute later the rope falls into the mud. And then a stranger's memory bursts into his head. A name. Kale. An outcast. The Kingdom of Vellaris. A family burned for harboring a cat. Images fly by like slides on a broken projector. A stone city. People in uniform drag an old woman out of her house. A scream. Fire. A cart packed with bound people. A road to nowhere. Kale died, and he took his place. And this is where the strangest part begins. A blue panel flashes before his eyes. The letters are clear. They hang in the air like a hologram in a presentation. The architect's system. Initialization. Do you wish to build your first structure? He reaches out his hand. His fingers pass right through it. He is an engineer from a world where such words had meaning. They shouldn't exist here. But the panel hangs there, waiting for a response. He doesn't have time to answer. A cry comes from the bushes on the right. Quiet. A child's cry. Someone is covering their mouth, but sobs break through. He stands up. His legs are unsteady. Kale's body is weaker than his own, younger, but battered and malnourished. He takes a step toward the bushes. A branch cracks. The crying stops. He parts the branches. Under the bush, a girl of about 9 is curled up in a ball. The first thing he sees are her ears. Cat-like ears stick out from tangled gray-white hair and are pressed against her head. Her green eyes are huge with terror. She is shaking. Bare ankles bear rope marks. She, too, was tied up and abandoned. Every line of her body screams the same thing. Don't hit me. He slowly shows her his open palms. He doesn't know this world, but open palms mean the same thing everywhere. I am unarmed. He sits down on the ground, all the way, to be lower than her. Don't loom over someone who's afraid. The girl doesn't move. Her eyes dart from his face to his hands. A minute passes. 2. Finally, she loosens her grip around her knees by a millimeter. He introduces himself. Kale. He says he was abandoned here too. He says he won't hurt her. Her ears perk up slightly. A minute later, she answers with a single word. Rena. He nods. He says he needs to get something done before dark. He says she can go with him or stay. Rena looks at the darkening sky. Then she stands up and follows him, 5 steps behind, like a little shadow. The sun is setting. It will be cold here at night, maybe deadly cold. The girl needs warmth. She needs water. She needs at least the illusion of safety. To the right, the slope drops into a shallow ravine. The walls are made of dense clay. The wind blows up the ravine from below. His engineer's mind is already calculating. The ravine will act as a chimney. Dig a niche in the wall. Build a fire at the entrance. Warm air will flow inward, and the smoke will rise upward. No fumes. He presses his palm against the ground. And something strange happens. He feels the earth. Not the surface, the depth, density, moisture, good clay. The layer goes deep. The water is clear 4 meters down. He pulls his hand away. No one can determine an aquifer by touch, but he felt it. The blue panel flashes. The material sense skill is activated. Enough thinking. Time to work. He sharpens a sharp stone and cuts into the slope. He digs a teardrop-shaped niche. The narrow side faces the wind. That way the wind doesn't blow it out, but is drawn in. He digs a channel to drain the water. An hour later, the niche is ready. He places a flat stone at an angle above the fire. A deflector. The smoke will go up instead of into his face. Yu strikes a spark on the 4th try. The fire catches. Warmth seeps inside. Smoke rises upward. It worked. Rena watches silently the whole time. When the warmth spreads through the niche, she takes a step closer. Then another. He signals that she can come in. She sits down against the wall. She pulls her knees up to her chest. She closes her eyes. And for the first time all day, her ears perk up. He finds a stream 20 meters away. The water is murky. Tomorrow he'll make a filter out of sand and charcoal. Today they'll drink it as is. He brings water to Rena. She drinks greedily. Then she looks at him with a long gaze. In her eyes, a simple and terrifying question. Why are you helping me? He doesn't explain. Explanations mean nothing to a child who has been betrayed her whole life. Only actions matter. He sits down at the entrance with his back to the wind, between her and the cold, between her and the darkness. Night falls quickly, and then, in the distance, something howls. Not a wolf. Something else. The hair on Rena's ears stands on end. Kale's memory whispers a word. The remnants of the wasteland monsters. Spawn of a war that ended 200 years ago. They still roam here. The howl grows closer. Rena presses herself against the wall. He doesn't move. He listens. The howl comes from the southwest. The wind blows from the northwest, so the scent is carried in the other direction. The fire burns inside, and its light isn't visible from the south. Sometimes, the best strategy is to be a mouse. The howl fades. Silence returns. He mentally summons the panel. Map. A topographic map overlays the darkness. Green is fertile soil. Blue is water. Gray is rock. Red is clay. 100 meters to the east is an outcrop of rock. If it's limestone, he has building material. Rena finally falls asleep. A small lump by the wall. Her cat-like ears twitch in her sleep. He looks at her and thinks. A foreign world. A foreign body. No food, no weapons, no clothes. No one but a 9-year-old girl. a cat who trusted him only because there was no one else, and a strange system that promises blueprints in exchange for construction. All his life he built houses for people he'd never seen. He did it better than anyone in the department. 30 years of life, and the only thing he knows how to do is calculate loads and choose mortar for the foundation. Maybe for the first time in his life, that's enough. In the morning, he'll build, not a shack, not a temporary shelter, calculated, with a safety margin, a place where no one will ever touch this girl again. The morning arrives gray and cold. In the light of day, the forest is simply indifferent. Tall coniferous trunks, timber, willows by the stream for weaving, clay, a stone 100 meters away, water nearby, a good spot. He pulls a stub of a charcoal pencil and a piece of birch bark from Cale's pocket. His hands remember how to hold a pencil. Cale was a draftsman. He sketches out a plan for 3 days. A water filter, a dugout with an entrance, scout the rock to the east, find food, fish in the stream, roots, and the wild forest begins to take shape. Not chaos, a construction site. There's a rustling behind him. Rena is standing in the doorway. Her hair is sticking out in all directions. Her ears are pricked, and there's no more panic in her green eyes. There's curiosity. She looks at the sketch. She quietly asks what he's building. He answers without turning around. He's building a place where no one will touch her anymore. Rena is silent for a long time. Then she sits down nearby, 2 steps away, no longer 5. Progress. The first day began with water. Without clean water, nothing else made sense. Junho cut willow twigs by the stream and wove a basket. Cale's hands remembered the weaving better than his own ever would have. The basket turned out rough but sturdy. He gathered charcoal from the night's fire. He spread it out among the stones. He placed a layer of small pebbles at the bottom of the basket. On top, a layer of sand from the stream bank. On top, crushed charcoal. On top, another layer of sand. The simplest filter. 3 stages of purification. Not perfect, but it removes the murk and most of the bacteria. He scooped water from the stream and ran it through the filter. The water came out clear, almost transparent. Rena watched his every move. She sat on a rock by the niche and didn't take her eyes off him. When he handed her the water, she sniffed it. Then she tasted it. Her ears twitched. She looked at him as if he had just done something impossible. For her, it was impossible. In her world, dirty water was drunk dirty. No one knew that water could be purified. Junho drank after her. The water was cold and clear. Good. Task number 2. Food. He surveyed the stream. Shallow, a rocky bottom. In the quiet backwaters near the bank, the shadows of fish flickered. Small, but enough. He built a dam out of stones, narrowed the stream. At the narrowest point, he stuck forked branches into the bottom and wove them together with twigs. The simplest fish trap. The fish swim downstream and enter the trap, unable to escape. 2 hours later, there were 4 fish the size of a palm in the trap. He gutted them on a rock, skewered them on twigs, roasted them over the coals. Rena ate silently and quickly. She ate 1.5 fish and then sat with her eyes closed. You could tell by her face that she hadn't eaten anything hot in a long time. Maybe days. Maybe a week. He didn't ask. Questions could wait. As long as her stomach was jam, the world seems less frightening. After the meal, he headed east. Rena followed him, just 3 steps behind. The outcrop of rock was exactly where the system's map had indicated. A gray-yellow stone jutted out from the hillside. Junho placed his palm on it. The skill activated instantly. Limestone. Good quality. Dense. Medium hardness. Easy to work with, but durable after firing. He could make bricks out of it. He could make lime mortar. He could build. Really build. The blue panel flashed. Resource detected. Limestone. Good quality. 1 design point for discovering the resource. Design points. 1. He didn't know yet if that was a lot or a little. He mentally opened the panel. A list of available blueprints. Most were locked. Gray icons with padlocks. But a few were available for free. Basic ones. Reinforced dugout. Cost 0. Clay stove. Cost 0. Simple palisade. Cost 1 point. Filtered well. Cost 1 point. He could spend his single point on a palisade or on a well. A palisade is protection. A well is water. He already has water from the stream, but the stream is 20 meters away. Walking to the stream through the snow with a child in winter. No. A well. Water always comes first. He unlocked the well blueprint. The panel displayed the diagram. A round well, 4 meters deep to the aquifer. The walls are reinforced with masonry. A gravel filter at the bottom, a wooden frame with a lid on top. He knew all this. He had designed similar systems in areas without a central water supply. But the system had added details he wouldn't have considered. The type of masonry for local limestone. The optimal diameter for soil of this density. Trivialities. But trivialities that saved time and effort. The system didn't provide magic. It provided knowledge. Precise. Concrete. Applicable here and now. He returned to camp and got to work. He widened the niche in the ravine's slope, deepened it. He smoothed out the walls. He tamped down the floor and covered it with a thin layer of sand. He reinforced the entrance with 2 posts made of young tree trunks. He wove branches between them. It turned into a door. Rough, but a door. Rena stood nearby and watched. Then she picked up a stone and brought it to him. She placed it by the entrance. She looked. He nodded. She brought a second one, then a third. By evening, there was a low stone wall at the entrance. Rena had built it herself. Without words, without instructions, she simply saw what he was doing and began to help. By the time the sun set, they had a real dugout. Small, 2 by 3 meters, but with a door, with a hearth, with a smoke deflector, with a drainage channel, with a floor where you could lie down and not freeze. Rena went inside and walked around the entire space. She touched the walls. She touched the posts by the entrance. Then she sat down in a corner and hugged her knees. But this time, not out of fear. She looked around as if she couldn't believe it. She asked if she could sleep there. He replied that it was her home. The word home fell into the silence like a stone into water. Rena opened her mouth, closed it. Her ears pressed against her head, but not out of fear, out of something else. She turned her back to the wall. He saw how her shoulders trembling. She was crying, silently, as best she could. He didn't try to comfort her. Comfort is words, and words are useless now. He went outside and began sketching a plan for the well on the ground. In the morning, he would start digging. On the second day he dug. The earth gave way easily. The clay was dense, but not rock hard. It became rock hard at a depth of 1.5 meters. A harder layer began there. He switched his stone tool for a heavier, sharper one. Rena sat above and hauled away the dirt he was throwing out. She did this without being asked. The system showed him the depth to the water. 3 meters. 2.5. 2. He could feel the moisture. The soil was getting wet under his hands. By evening on the second day, at a depth of 4 meters, water began to seep from the well wall. Clean. He tasted it. Cold and tasteless. The sandy layer filtered it naturally. The blue panel flashed. Construction complete. A well with natural filtration. Good quality. Design points. +3. The system's range of view increased to 200 meters. 3 points. And an expanded map. He climbed out of the well, dirty and wet, his hands scraped raw. Rena stood above him, looking down into the pit where the water glistened. Her tail swayed from side to side. He noticed this movement for the first time. Cattails move when their owners feel something strong. Joy, excitement, interest. Rena was interested. He unfolded the updated map. 200 meters in all directions. Forest, stream, stone exit. And something new. To the southwest, 180 meters away from them, 2 red dots. Living creatures, not monsters. The system marked monsters in black. These were red. People, or beastmen. He looked toward the southwest. The forest was silent. The red dots weren't moving. They lay where they were, wounded, or dead, or hiding. He looked at Rena. Rena looked at him. He said there was someone to the southwest. Rena tensed. Her ears flattened. Her first reaction to any strangers was fear. He said he would go take a look. He said she could stay. Rena looked at the dugout, at the well, then at him. She shook her head. She would go with him. She was afraid. But she was even more afraid to stay alone. They walked through the forest, Junho in front. Rena was 2 steps behind. He smelled the blood before he saw them. 2 people lay beneath a fallen tree, an old man and a young woman. The old man was big. Even lying on the ground he was big. Broad shoulders, powerful arms, gray fur on his forearms. Wolf ears, pressed against his head not out of fear, but out of pain. His right leg was covered in blood, a deep, jagged wound. Claw marks. A monster. A young woman lay next to him. Red hair, fox ears, a sharp nose. She was unconscious. There were burns on her arms, old and fresh. Plucked leaves and stems were scattered on the ground in front of them. She had tried to make a poultice for his wound, but she lost consciousness before she finished. Junho crouched down beside him. He touched the old man's forehead. Hot. Infection. The wound wasn't fatal, but without treatment, it would become so. He examined the plants the foxwoman had gathered. He didn't know much about the herbs of this world, but the system flashed. The material sense skill works on more than just stone. He touched one of the leaves. Antiseptic properties, for external use. He touched the stem. Painkiller. He touched the root. Antipyretic, for internal use. She knew what she was doing. This herbalist fox had gathered exactly what was needed. She just hadn't had time. He ground the leaves between stones, mixed them with water from the flask he'd made that morning from a piece of birch bark. He applied the paste to the wound. The old twitched and growled. His eyes opened, yellow, furious with pain. He saw the man above him, and his hand shot toward Junho's throat. His fingers closed. Even wounded, he was stronger. Much stronger. Junho didn't flinch. He calmly pointed to the wound and the paste on it. The old man lowered his eyes. He saw the treated wound. His fingers unclenched. He rasped something. Kale's memory translated it. He asked who Junho was. Junho replied that he was an outcast, just like him. The old man looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Rena, who was standing behind a tree, peeking out with one eye. A cat girl. Small. Frightened. But alive. And next to a man who wouldn't hurt her. The old man closed his eyes. His name was Torin. He was a blacksmith from a village on the border of Vellaris. He had been banished 3 days ago. The young fox beside him was Yuna, a herbalist. She had been walking alone and found him in the forest with a torn leg. She tried to help. She strained herself. Now they were both lying here, waiting to die. Junho said it was too early to die. He said he had a dugout, a well, and a fire. Torin opened one eye and looked at him as if he were crazy. A well? After 3 days in the Wastelands? Junho shrugged. He's an engineer. That's what he does. Carrying Torin was a challenge. The old man weighed as much as 2 Junhos. But Torin could lean on his left leg and a cane. Junho carried Yuna on his back. She was light. Too light. Rena walked ahead. She had volunteered to lead the way. The first initiative in 3 days. She guided them through the forest, her ears pricking up at every sound. A little living radar. When they reached the camp, Torin saw the dugout and stopped. Then he saw the well. Then he turned to Junho. The old blacksmith's face bore an expression Junho had seen before. On foremen at construction sites, when they saw that someone had done the job cleanly. Not beautifully, not impressively. Cleanly. Torin said nothing. He just nodded. He sat down heavily on the rocks at the entrance. He stretched out his injured leg, and for the first time in 3 days, he exhaled. Yuna woke up an hour later. She saw that she was in a shelter, that Torin's wound had been treated, that a fire was burning nearby and fish were roasting, that a little cat girl was holding out water to her. Clean water. Yuna took the water. She drank. Then she looked at Junho. Golden eyes, alert, intelligent. She asked who he was. He answered just as he had Torin, an outcast. She asked why he was helping. He replied that he had a well, but no blacksmith and no herbalist. He needs them just as much as they need him. Yuna looked at him, and he could see her thoughts racing through her eyes. She was used to deception. She was used to help coming at a price. And when the price was stated plainly and without pretense, she didn't know how to react. Torin chuckled. He said the guy was as straight as a stick, and that he liked that. Yuna said nothing, but she stayed. That night, 4 people slept in the dugout. It was cramped, uncomfortable, but warm. Junho didn't sleep. He lay by the entrance and thought. 4 people. A dugout meant for 2. Tomorrow they'd need a second one. And they need to stock up on food. 1 bushel won't feed 4 people. He needs nets. Or another bushel. Or snares for small game. Torin can't walk for at least a week. But his hands work. He's a blacksmith. If given tools and metal, he can forge. But there's no metal. Not yet. Yuna knows the herbs of this world. She can gather medicinal plants and find edible roots. She's useful right away. Rena. Rena is small and weak, but she has cat ears that hear what others cannot, and cat eyes that see in the dark. She can be a sentry, a lookout, a little guardian who will hear danger before anyone else. Every person is a resource. Not in a cynical sense, in an engineering sense. Everyone has an ability that can be put to use. The architect's task is not to build alone. The architect's task is to organize the construction. He fell asleep with that thought. The blue panel flashed one last time before he closed his eyes. The settlement's population is 4 people. New opportunities will become available at 10. Junho created a water filtration system and dug a well, earning 3 design points and expanding the map's radius to 200 meters. He found and brought to the camp an old wolf blacksmith named Torin with an injured leg, and a young fox herbalist named Yuna who was unconscious. The population had grown to 4 people, and the system indicated that new opportunities would open up when it reached 10. By morning, Yuna was already on her feet. She looked terrible, pale. Her thin arms were burned. Her red tail hung limply. But she was standing, and that was what mattered. The first thing she did was examine Torin's wound. She removed his poultice. She sniffed it. She applied a fresh one made from herbs she'd gathered right there by the niche. Her hand movements were precise and quick. Professional. She knew what she was doing. Torin groaned but endured. When Yuna finished, she turned to Junho and said he had treated the wound correctly yesterday. She said that if he hadn't washed it out and applied antiseptic, gangrene would have set in by morning. Junho nodded. He didn't explain that he had learned the properties of the herbs through his skill. Not the time. He asked Yuna if she could find edible plants in the forest. Yuna raised an eyebrow. She looked at him as if he'd asked if fish could swim. She went into the forest and returned an hour later with her arms full. Roots, tubers, some dark green stems, nuts, 2 kinds of berries. She laid everything out on a rock by the fire and began to explain. This root can be eaten raw. This one only after cooking. These berries are sweet but cause bloating. These are bitter but give strength. The nuts are hard but nutritious. She spoke quickly. Her hands moved without stopping, sorting, cleaning, preparing. Junho listened and memorized. He now had an expert on the local flora, a priceless resource. While Yuna prepared breakfast, he began building a second dugout, next to the first one. The same design, a teardrop, the narrow side facing the wind, a deflector, a channel for water, but slightly larger, for 2 large occupants, Torin and Yuna. Torin sat at the entrance and watched. He couldn't help physically, but he could help in other ways. He spoke up. He began to tell his story. For 30 years he had been a blacksmith. He worked with iron. He knew ore, he knew coal, he knew the temperature by the color of the flame. In his village there was a workshop with 2 forges and an anvil that his father had found in the ruins of a pre-war city. The anvil was made of steel that no one knows how to smelt anymore. When he was driven out, he couldn't take anything with him, but the knowledge remained. He asked what Junho knew how to do with stone. Junho answered. He answered in detail. Lime mortar, firing, masonry, arches, drainage, foundations. Torin listened in silence. His yellow eyes grew wider and wider. Then he said quietly that Junho was either a god or a madman, because no one in Arcadia knows that much about stone. Junho replied that he wasn't a god. As for being mad, he wasn't sure. Torin laughed. The laughter turned into a cough. Yuna snapped at him to stay still. Rena smiled for the first time in 4 days. A small one, almost imperceptible, but a smile. The second dugout was ready by evening. Junho spent less time on it than on the first one. His hands already knew what to do. His body was getting used to it. Kale's muscles were weak but young. They were quickly building endurance. The system flashed. Construction complete. Dugout reinforced. Good quality. Design points +1. The next day, 2 more arrived. The system showed red dots on the map to the south. Junho went alone. Torin insisted he take a sturdy stick. The stick wouldn't help against a monster, but it would reassure the blacksmith. The 2 red dots turned out to be a mother and child. A bear woman with a boy of about 6. The boy was a cub with round ears and frightened brown eyes. The woman held him in her arms and wouldn't let go. She was exhausted. Her feet were covered in blood. She had been walking barefoot for at least 2 days. When she saw Junho, she shielded the child with her body. He held out his open palms again. He crouched lower, again. He waited, again. It was becoming a habit. This is what first contact looks like with those whom the world has taught to fear. No words, no promises. Silence and time. The woman's name was Tara. The boy's name was Bear. She was the wife of a blacksmith from another village. Her husband had been killed during the expulsion. She and her son had been abandoned in the wastes. She was heading north because someone among the exiles had said there was water in the north. She found a stream and smoke from a fire. Junho led them to the camp. Rena saw the boy and froze. Then she slowly approached. The boy looked up at her. She was older and taller. He was round and small. Rena crouched down in front of him and quietly waved her hand. The boy hid behind his mother. He peeked out, then hid again, then peeked out again. Rena waited. 5 minutes later, the boy came out and sat down next to her. Rena wasn't smiling, but her tail was swaying slightly. 6. The blue panel updated. Population 6. 4 until new opportunities open up. 3 days later, 2 more arrived. Brothers. Young stag shapeshifters. Their antlers had just begun to grow. They were hunters, or tried to be. Skinny. Hungry. But their legs were long and fast. 2 days after them, an old woman appeared. An owl woman. Small. Hunchbacked. Almost blind in daylight, but with huge yellow eyes that saw in the dark better than anyone else's. She came to the light of the campfire and said she'd heard the sound of construction 2 kilometers away. Good hearing for an owl. 10. The blue panel flashed brightly. Population 10. The settlement planner skill is activated. New blueprints are available. Junho stood in the middle of his small camp, consisting of 2 dugouts and a well, and looked at the 10 living beings who now depended on him. An old blacksmith, a wolf with an injured leg, a young fox herbalist with burns on her hands, a cat girl sleeping curled up in a ball, a she-bear with her little son, 2 fawn brothers, an old owl woman, and him. A man in a foreign body with the architect's system and 30 years of engineering experience from a world that doesn't exist here. He activated the settlement planner. The world before his eyes changed. Translucent lines spread across the ground. Optimal routes, building sites, wind zones, water drainage zones, sunlight zones light. He saw the future of this place. Not a mystical future, an engineering one. A smithy will stand here. The smoke will drift westward and won't interfere with the residential buildings. Here, vegetable gardens. The southern slope, maximum sunlight. Here, the road from the gate to the center. Straight, wide, with drainage ditches on either side. The gate. He's still thinking about the gate. He has 10 men and 2 dugouts. And he's thinking about the gate. Maybe Thorin was right. Maybe he really is crazy. He closed the panel and gathered everyone. 10 faces looked at him, wary, tired, frightened, but listening. He spoke. He said they could survive on their own, hide in burrows, catch fish, wait until the monsters came or until winter finished them off. Or they could build, together. Not a burrow, not a camp, a settlement. With houses, with a smithy, with winter supplies, with defenses. He said he knew how to do it, that he had knowledge no one else in this world possessed. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed their hands. All 10 pairs. Silence. Thorin looked at him with yellow eyes. Then he said his hands were whole and that he was in. Yuna rolled her eyes and said she was already in since he'd healed Thorin with her own herbs. Tara pulled Bear close and asked only one thing. Would her son be safe? Junho replied that that was why he was building. The dear brothers exchanged glances and nodded simultaneously. The old owl said she was old and weak but could see at night. Rena said nothing. She simply moved away from the wall and sat down next to Junho. For the first time, not behind him, next to him. He sketched a plan on the ground, the first real plan for the settlement, with a stick on wet clay. 3 log houses, a courtyard, a smithy on the leeward side, a communal storage shed, a palisade around the perimeter. 10 people, 6 structures. 4 weeks until the first cold snap. He assigned the tasks. The dear brothers would chop down trees. Fast legs and young backs. Tara would trim the logs. Bears have strong hands, even emaciated bears. Yuna would gather supplies, roots and berries and mushrooms and everything that could be, and store. The old owl keeps the night watch. Rena keeps the day watch. Thorin. Thorin cannot stand yet, but he can weave ropes and nets from willow twigs. The blacksmith's hands are accustomed to fine work, and he himself will build foundations, walls, roofs, every day from dawn until dark. Work began the next morning. The dear brothers went into the forest with stone axes that Junho had made overnight. The axes were crude, a stone tied to a stick, but better than nothing. The sound of axes rang out in the silence of the wastelands, the first sound of construction in 200 years. Tara was hewing the logs the brothers brought. She worked silently and intently. Bear sat next to Rena, and together they looked around. 2 little sentinels. Yuna went into the forest and returned with sacks of herbs and roots. She dried them on the rocks by the fire. The smell was strange, bitter and sweet at the same time. Thorin was weaving. His large, rough fingers moved with surprising dexterity. In a single day he made 3 baskets and began a fishing net. And Junho was building. The first house. A log cabin. 4 walls, a roof, a floor. He knew that a log cabin was primitive, but primitive didn't mean bad. It meant affordable. He laid the logs with interlocking joints. Each log fit into a groove cut into the one below. He filled the gaps with moss and clay. The system dictated the angles, the optimal roof pitch for rainwater runoff, the length of the eaves to protect the walls from water, the window placement for maximum light. Small things. But a house is made up of small things. 7 days later, the first house stood. Small. 4 by 5 meters. 1 room. 1 window. A door. A roof made of poles covered with bark and packed with clay. Inside, a stone hearth. A floor packed down and sprinkled with sand. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was a house. A real house. With a roof that didn't leak. With a door that closed. With walls that kept the heat in. The blue panel flashed. Construction complete. Log cabin. Good quality. Design points. +2. Torin got to his feet. The wound hadn't fully healed yet, but he could hobble along with a cane. He entered the house, walked around it, touched the walls, tapped the corners. Then he went outside and looked at Junho. He said that in 30 years in Arcadia, he hadn't seen such masonry. He said the cracks were sealed so the winter wind wouldn't get through. He said he didn't understand how one man had built this in a week. Junho shrugged. He said he hadn't built it alone. He said that without the logs the deer had felled and Tara had hewn, without the ropes Torin had braided, and without the food Yuna had found, he wouldn't have built anything. Torin looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded, slowly, wearily. It was a nod of respect. The blacksmith acknowledged the master. That evening, all 10 of them sat in the first house. It was cramped. The hearth was hot. Bear fell asleep on his mother's lap. The old owl dozed in the corner. The deer brothers were arguing about something in whispers. Yuna was sorting through herbs. Thorin stared into the fire. Rena sat next to Junho and drew with a stick on the earthen floor. She was drawing a house, a small, crooked house with a triangular roof. The first drawing she had made since he found her. He looked at the drawing and thought. 10 people. 1 house. 2 dugouts. A well. A water filter. 4 weeks, and they had walls and a roof and warmth. It was a beginning. Just a beginning. But the foundation had been laid. The population had grown to 10 people in a week and a half. Tara the bear and her son Bear had arrived, along with the deer brothers and the old owl. The settlement planner skill had been activated. Junho organized the division of labor and built the first log house in a week. Torin acknowledged his skill, and all 10 joined forces for the construction. Autumn was bearing down. The air had grown colder. In the morning, frost covered the grass. There were perhaps 3 weeks left until the first snow. Perhaps 2. Junho didn't know the climate of this world, but he felt it through Kale's body. The body remembered the winters of Arcadia. They were harsh. He needed to build 3 things in the time remaining. 2 more houses, a clay oven, and a palisade. Without houses, people would freeze. Without an oven, there would be no hot food, and no way to fire building materials. Without a palisade, monsters would enter at night, and nothing else would matter. He spent 1 concept point on a blueprint for the palisade. The diagram unfolded before his eyes. The system showed the optimal layout. A circle with a diameter of 40 meters. all the buildings inside. Stakes 2.5 meters high, sharpened at the top, dug in 0.5 meter deep, connected by crossbars for rigidity. A simple but reliable design. The problem was the number of stakes. A circle of that diameter would require about 400 logs. Even with the Deer brothers, that's at least 2 weeks of cutting. And he needs to build houses at the same time. He changed the plan. Not a circle, a semicircle. On one side, a palisade. On the other, a hillside and a ravine. Natural protection. The number of stakes was cut in half. 10 days. He got to work. The Deer brothers cut and carried. Tara trimmed and sharpened them. Junho dug them in. Torin limped along the line, checking every stake. Was it level? Was it dug in deep enough? The blacksmith was used to checking quality. He didn't need to be asked. At the same time, Junho was building a kiln. A clay kiln. The simplest kind. He dug up clay near the dickstone. He mixed it with sand and fine straw that Yuna had found in an old abandoned field a kilometer to the south. A field. It was an important discovery. If it had once been plowed, that meant the soil was suitable for crops. He marked it on the map in his head. He built the oven by hand. The walls were thick, 10 centimeters. The dome-shaped vault ensured even heat. The chimney was slanted. The draft would be good. 3 days of drying, then the first firing. The oven held up. It didn't crack. He loaded it with firewood and lit it. The heat burned steadily and strongly. Yuna immediately brought the pot. The pot was a rough clay one she had made from local clay. It was crooked, but it held water and didn't leak. She placed it in the oven, and an hour later the camp smelled of hot soup for the first time. Real hot food. Not fish roasted on a stick, but a thick stew of roots and rabbit meat that the Deer brothers had caught in snares. All 10 people gathered around the stove. Bear stared at the boiling pot and couldn't take his eyes off it. His mother was crying quietly. She wasn't crying out of grief. She was crying because her son would see hot food for the first time in a week. Yuna poured the stew into the clay bowls she had fashioned 2 days earlier. The bowls were crooked, ugly, but they held hot food, and that made them beautiful. Junho ate and thought. The stove works. That means we can fire bricks. That means we can build with stone. That means we can make lime mortar. Every new ability unlocked 10 more. It was a chain reaction, just like in engineering. One solution creates a platform for 10 others. On the 8th day after construction of the palisade began, 2 events occurred. First, the palisade was ready. A semicircle of 200 stakes, 2.5 meters high, with a gate made of double logs. The blue panel lit up. Construction complete. Defensive palisade. Average quality. 2 points added to the design score. Field of view increased to 300 meters. Average quality. He knew why. The stakes were of varying diameters. Some stood slightly crooked. There hadn't been time for a perfect job. But it stands, and it protects. That's enough for now. The second event was more important. In the evening, the map showed movement. Not red dots. Black ones. 3 black dots were moving from the south. Slowly, but purposefully. Monsters. Junho stood on a makeshift platform by the palisade and stared into the darkness. The old owl stood beside him. Her huge eyes could see in the night. She described what she saw. 3 creatures, the size of a large deer. 4 legs, long snouts, shiny black fur. Distorted, mutated, She called them night hounds, remnants from the abyss. Fast, hungry for warm blood. They sense the living and follow the heat. They had sensed the stockade, the scent of fresh wood and a fire. 3 black dots approached the perimeter and stopped, sniffing, scratching the ground. Junho could hear their breathing. Heavy, wet. Rena stood below, by the wall of the house. She held Bear close to her. The boy wasn't crying. He clung to her hand and said nothing. The brothers held sharpened stakes like spears. Torin stood with a hammer he had made himself from a heavy stone and a stick. His leg still hurt, but he stood. One of the hounds lunged at the palisade. A blow. The stake shook, but held. The creature howled and jumped back. The tip of a stake slashed its muzzle. A second creature tried to get around it. It found the gate. The heavy logs were closed and propped up with stones. It pushed. The gate creaked, but did not open. Junho held his breath. The palisade is holding. The third creature found what he had feared. The spot where the hillside met the palisade. The joint. The gap between the rock and the stakes. Narrow enough for a person. But the hound was agile. It began to squeeze through. Junho grabbed a burning ember from the fire and hurled it. The fire struck the creature in the side. It yelped. Its fur began to smoke. The creature recoiled. But it didn't leave. All 3 hounds circled the palisade until dawn. No one in the camp slept. When the first light touched the trees, the creatures were gone. They had vanished into the forest. In the morning, Junho inspected the palisade, the gate, the junction with the slope, the spot where the creature had struck. He memorized every weak spot. The junction with the slope. That was a mistake. His mistake. He hadn't thought through how the wooden wall would connect to the stone slope. The gap was a trifle, but that trifle nearly let the monster in. Engineers have no room for trifles. He sealed the gap with stones and clay that very day. Torin helped. The old blacksmith hauled stones and laid them evenly. His hand was precise. A blacksmith's hand. When they finished, Torin looked at the sealed gap and said one thing. He said that a wall is only as strong as its weakest point. Junho nodded. He knew that. And he'd just received a reminder that was worth a sleepless night. After the hound's attack, something had changed in the camp. People began to move faster. They worked harder. The threat was not abstract. They had heard claws scraping against the stakes. They had seen the tracks on the ground that morning. It was real. The Deer brothers were chopping down trees at triple the usual speed. Tara was hewing them with such force that splinters flew 3 meters. Even Bear carried small stones for the foundation of the new house. Little hands, little stones. But he carried them. Junho took advantage of this burst of energy. He built the second house in 5 days, the third in 4. His hands knew what to do. The plan was well rehearsed. Every log in its place, every notch precise. The system earned him points. He was saving them up. He needed the blueprint for the smithy. Without a smithy, Torin is useless.
And without Torin, they'll be working with stone axes forever. The smithy cost 5 points. He had 8. He unlocked the blueprint. The diagram unfolded. A bellows, an anvil, bellows, a pipe, all made from available materials. Stone, clay, wood, leather for the bellows. They didn't have any leather.
Yuna said there were deer in the forest. Not deer men. Ordinary deer. Game. The deer brothers exchanged glances. Hunting deer felt awkward to them. But they understood. Wild deer weren't their kin. They were meat and hides. The hunt took 2 days. The brothers were fast and knew the habits of the game. 2 deer. Enough meat for 2 weeks if smoked. Hides for furs and clothing. Bones for tools. Yuna butchered the carcasses so quickly that Junho didn't have time to blink. Her hands moved like a machine, precisely and without wasted motion. She caught his gaze and grinned. She said that a herbalist must know anatomy. He began building the smithy the next day. Torn stood nearby and directed the placement of the forge. His voice had changed. Not the voice of a wounded old man, the voice of a master in his domain. He told Junho where to place the stones for the furnace, how to position the anvil, at what angle the draft pipe should be. Junho listened. Torn knew more about this. An engineer designs the structure. A blacksmith knows how to work within it. Together, they created something neither of them could have created alone. The smithy was ready in a week. Small. 1 forge. 1 anvil made of the hardest stone Junho could find. Not a real steel anvil, but it would do for a start. Bellows made of deer hide. A pipe made of clay rings. Fuel. They needed charcoal. Junho built a charcoal kiln. That was basic knowledge too. Stack the wood, cover it with earth, leave an opening for the draft. Set it on fire. Wait 2 days. The charcoal turned out well. Torrin took a piece. He rolled it between his fingers. He sniffed it. His eyes lit up. He said that charcoal like this was workable. The system found the ore. 400 meters to the southeast, a small outcrop, bog ore. Not the best grade, but enough for plain iron. The Deer brothers dug the ore for 2 days. Torrin selected the best pieces. He loaded them into the furnace. Yuna pumped the bellows. Rena brought the charcoal. Even Bear stood and watched, unable to look away. The fire roared in the furnace. The heat was so intense that it was impossible to stand closer than 2 meters. Thorin stood half a meter away. His face glistened with sweat. His wolf ears were pressed flat against his head, but not out of fear, out of concentration. He was working. 4 hours later, the first piece of iron emerged from the furnace. Small, about the size of a fist. Rough, porous. But iron. Real iron. Thorin placed it on the anvil and struck it with the hammer. The ringing echoed across the clearing. Clear. Metallic. Everyone froze. Thorin struck again and again. The iron flattened. It took shape. Under the old blacksmith's blows, the shapeless lump turned into a blade. Rough, simple, but sharp. The first knife. The first iron tool in their settlement. Thorin held it up and turned to Junho. In the old man's yellow eyes was something Junho had never seen before. Not respect. Not gratitude. Hope. The old blacksmith, who had thought his craft had died along with his village, held in his hands proof that this was not so. He held out the knife to Junho. Junho took it. The blade was still warm. He said it was Thorin's knife, and that he didn't need it. Thorin shook his head. He said that the first item from a new forge is always given to the one who built it. That is the blacksmith's law. An ancient law. A law his father taught him. Junho accepted the knife. The blue panel flashed. Construction complete. Forge with a furnace. Good quality. Design points +5. View radius increased to 500 meters. He felt the map expand in his mind.
500 meters in all directions. He saw a forest, a stream, hills, fields, and far to the south, at the very edge of the radius, red dots, many red dots, moving north. People, beastfolk, coming this way. He didn't know who they were, didn't know how many there were, but they were coming. And he already had walls and a smithy and 10 people who had begun to believe that it was possible to live here. They arrived 3 days later. Not all at once. First 2, then 5, then a group of 11. Exhausted, tattered clothes, empty eyes. Beastmen and humans mixed together. Vellaris continued the purge. Every week new carts carried new exiles out to the wastes. Those who survived the first few days headed north. They searched for water. They searched for shelter. And they found the smoke from the forge. Smoke that rose above the trees like a beacon. Junho stood at the gate and watched them. A wolf woman with 2 children. An old human man with his head bandaged. A fox teenager with a face so angry it looked like he was ready to bite. A family of rabbit beastmen. Quiet, timid, huddling close together. A middle-aged man with 1 arm. The other had been cut off during his exile. 27 people had arrived in the first week. Now there were 37 of them. The camp, designed for 10, was bursting at the seams. 3 houses weren't enough to hold everyone. People slept haphazardly on the floor. Some slept outside by the campfires. There wasn't enough food. Junho worked from dawn till dusk, gathering anything edible within a kilometer's radius. The brothers hunted every day. But 37 mouths to feed is not the same as 10. Junho didn't panic. He did the math. 37 people. Of those, 20 adults capable of working. 10 children and elderly people. 7 wounded or sick. 20 pairs of working hands. That's 3 times as many as there were before. So he could build faster. He gathered everyone capable of working. He explained the system. He divided them into teams. The first team, lumberjacks. 6 people. They cut and carry. The second team, builders. 8 people. They erect walls, lay roofs, and caulk cracks. The third team, support. 6 people. Food, water, firewood. Junho commanded the third. Torin worked in the smithy and taught a 1-armed man who turned out to be a former apprentice. You can't forge with 1 hand, but with 1 hand, you can pump the bellows and monitor the heat. Everyone found their place. Junho kept an eye on this. He remembered a rule from his past life. There are no useless people on a construction site. There are people who have been put in the wrong place. The old man with the bandaged head turned out to be a former teacher. He couldn't haul logs, but he could teach the children while their parents worked. The she-wolf with 2 children knew how to sew. She began cutting clothes out of deer hides, rough but warm. A teenage fox with a mean face. His name was Kai. He was 14. He didn't want to build. He wanted revenge. Vellaris had killed his father. He looked at Junho with defiance and hatred. Not toward Junho personally. Toward the world. At people. At anyone who tried to tell him that revenge would have to wait. Junho didn't argue with him. He didn't lecture him. He gave Kai an axe and set him to chopping down trees.
the hardest task for the angriest energy. Kai chopped as if every tree were a soldier of Vellaris. By evening, he was collapsing from exhaustion. The anger drained away with the sweat. A week later, he was chopping in silence. 2 weeks later, he started carrying firewood without being told. 3 weeks later, he helped Rena lift a heavy stone. Rena looked at him and nodded seriously. Kai turned away, but his ears turned red. Houses were going up, one after another. Junho no longer built every house himself. He drew up a plan, showed it to the crew, monitored the quality, made corrections. Each house took 3 days instead of 7. The system awarded points. He saved them for 2 purposes: a mill and a clay kiln for firing bricks. The mill cost 10 points, the kiln 8. He had saved up 14. He chose the kiln. The mill would have to wait. Without bricks, he built with wood. Wood burns. Wood rots. Wood makes for 1-story houses. Bricks make walls. Real walls. Walls that would survive winter and summer and the next winter. He found a spot for the kiln, outside the palisade, on the leeward side, so the heat and smoke wouldn't drift toward the living quarters. The design was simple: a chamber of stone and clay, a firebox at the bottom, ventilation holes, a loading window at the top. He built it himself, with Torin's help. The blacksmith understood fire. He understood how heat behaves in an enclosed space. His advice saved time and prevented mistakes. The kiln was ready in 4 days. The first firing. He loaded the green bricks he'd been molding for the past week, clay mixed with sand and fine straw, molded in wooden frames, dried in the sun. Now they needed to be fired. The fire burned for 12 hours. Junho maintained the temperature. Not too high, not too low. The system suggested the optimal settings. When he opened the kiln in the morning, the bricks were ready. Red, strong, smooth. He picked one up, tapped it. The sound was clear, resonant. A good brick. Torin took a second one, turned it over, tried to break it, couldn't break it, looked at Junho, grunted, said he was starting to get used to impossible things. Yuna stood nearby. She held a brick in her hands and twirled it like a curiosity. She said it was beautiful, red like an autumn leaf. Then she looked at Junho and asked why he needed so many bricks. He replied that he was building a wall. Yuna asked what kind of wall. He replied that it was a real one, a stone and brick wall, a tall one that neither hounds nor people could get through. Yuna looked at him for a long time. Then she smiled. She said he was definitely crazy, but a crazy person who knows how to make bricks. And so far, it's working. The first snow fell 10 days later. Light, prickly, cold. In the morning, the ground was white. The children poured out into the street. Bear rolled around in the snow and laughed. Rena stood to the side and watched. She wasn't playing, but she was smiling. This is what the settlement looked like after the first snow. 7 log houses, a stockade in a semicircle, a smithy with a forge, a kiln, a well, a dam on the stream, a smokehouse for meat, a shed for firewood, 6 weeks' worth of food. 37 people under one roof. Not everyone was comfortable. Not everyone was warm. But everyone was under a roof. Junho stood by the gate and looked at the snow. The blue panel flickered quietly. He opened the statistics. Population 37. 14 buildings. 12 design points. 600-meter radius.
He spent points on a blueprint for a kiln and another on an improved well with a pulley. He saved the rest. He needed a mill. A mill. A mill means flour. Flour means bread. Bread is a symbol. When people eat bread, they feel at home. Rena walked over and stood beside him. She came up to his shoulder. She had grown in 2 months, or maybe he just hadn't noticed before. She looked at the snow and the houses and the smoke from the chimneys. Then she asked quietly. She asked what this place was called. Junho thought for a moment. The settlement had no name. It was just a place, a camp. He looked at Rena. He asked what the word for the simplest thing was in the old language of the beastfolk. Here. Rena blinked. Then she said quietly, Ahen. Here. Ahen. He repeated it word for word. Ahen. Rena looked at him and her ears pricked up. She realized he wasn't just asking. She realized he was naming it. Ahen. The place is called Ahen. Here. Because for everyone who has been exiled and abandoned, the most important word is here. Here you are safe. Here you won't be hit. Here you can sleep without fear. Here. Rena lowered her eyes. Her hands were trembling. She gripped the hem of his sleeve tightly. Not his hand, his sleeve. She wasn't ready to take his hand yet, but she was holding on to his clothes, and that was more than she had ever allowed herself. That evening, he carved the name into the gate, with the knife Torn had forged. The letters were uneven. He was an engineer, not a calligrapher. But the word was legible. Ahen. Torn looked at the inscription and asked what it meant. Rena answered before Junho could open his mouth. She said one word. Home. Torn nodded. Then he turned away. But Junho saw the old man run his hand over his eyes. Blacksmiths don't cry, but sometimes their eyes itch. The first week of winter was hard. The temperature dropped. It snowed every day. Firewood was being burned faster than it could be gathered. Junho redesigned the heating system in the houses. He added heat-retaining stones inside the stoves. The stones heated up during the day and gave off heat at night. A simple principle. The heat capacity of a massive material. In his world, it was the basis of heated floors. Here, it was the difference between life and death. Yuna was sick. 3 days, a high fever. She had overexerted herself during a month of non-stop work. Her body couldn't take it. She lay in the house and was angry. Angry at herself for her weakness. Angry at the world for the cold. Angry at Junho for bringing her food and not letting her get up. She told him she wasn't used to being looked after. He replied that he would get used to it. She looked at him and said nothing. Her golden eyes were bright with fever, but something other than anger flashed in them. 3 days later, she got up. Thin, pale, but on her feet. And the first thing she did was go to her supply of herbs and start preparing medicine for the 3 children who had also caught colds. Rena was the last to get sick. She hid it. She coughed quietly. She hid her reddened eyes. She pretended everything was fine. Junho noticed on the second day. From the way she moved, slower, more carefully, as if every step took effort. He walked over and placed his hand on her forehead. Hot. Rena looked away.
She said she was fine, that she didn't need treatment, that the others were worse off. He didn't need an explanation. He understood. She was afraid of being a burden, afraid that if she got sick, she'd become useless, and useless people get abandoned. That's how it had been her whole life. He didn't say anything. He picked her up. She was light, even for Kale's frail body. He carried her into the house, laid her down by the stove, covered her with a fur. Yuna came and gave her a decoction. Bitter. Rena grimaced but drank it. Junho sat nearby and didn't leave. An hour. 2. Rena lay there and looked at him. Then she spoke softly. She said he could go, that he had work to do, that she would manage. He replied that work could wait. Rena closed her eyes. A tear trickled from beneath her closed eyelids. Just one. She didn't wipe it away. She fell asleep. Yuna stood in the doorway and watched them. Then she quietly left. 3 days later, Rena was well. She got up in the morning and the first thing she did was check all the guard posts. She walked the perimeter. She looked into every house. She counted the people. 37. Everyone was there. She returned to Junho and reported. Everything was fine. He nodded. She sat down next to him. Quietly. As if it were second nature. As if this had always been her place. The day Junho had marked in his memory was approaching. Rena's birthday. 10 years old. He didn't know the exact date. Rena didn't know herself. Orphaned beastfolk didn't always remember such things. But from the fragments of Kale's memory and what Rena had told him, he had calculated it roughly. Midwinter. He began preparing 2 weeks in advance. Quietly. Unobtrusively. He asked Torin. The old man nodded without asking why. He asked Yuna. The fox raised an eyebrow, then grinned and nodded. He asked the little squirrel girl who had come with the last group. The girl was 7. Her name was Naru. She was quiet and nimble and knew how to carve wood. One of the adults had taught her before the expulsion. And Junho himself went out beyond the palisade every evening for 20 minutes. Rena noticed. She asked where he was going. He replied that he was checking the territory. She didn't believe him. But she didn't press the issue. The morning of her birthday, Rena stepped out of the house and stopped. In the middle of the yard stood a swing. Wooden. 2 posts. A crossbar. Ropes made of woven willow strips. A seat made of a board planed smooth with rounded edges so it wouldn't splinter. The structure was designed for her weight. The seat height was at her hip level so she could sit down easily. The length of the ropes was chosen so that when swinging at maximum amplitude, her feet would not touch the ground. An engineering calculation for one specific child. There were things on the seat. A small iron bell on a thin chain. Torin's work. He had forged each link of the chain separately and joined them by hand. Cat people wore such bells as jewelry, a sign of a free person, not a slave collar. Next to the bell lay a pair of mittens, soft, made of rabbit fur. Yuna sewed them at night after everyone had fallen asleep. And a wooden figurine, a little cat with its ears perked up, carved by Naru's childish hand. Rough, a bit crooked. Beautiful. Rena stood and watched. She didn't move. 37 people stood around her and watched too. The silence was so thick you could hear the snow falling. Rena walked over to the swing. She touched the seat. She touched the ropes. She picked up the bell. It rang softly. She lifted her mittens, pressed them to her face.
Then she picked up the figurine, turned it over in her hands. Then she turned to Junho. Her face was wet. She asked, "Are they for her? Really for her?" He replied that they were for her. Rena opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. A sound escaped her that no one here had ever heard before. Loud crying. Not quiet, not silent, not hiding. A loud, open, choking cry of a child who had received a gift for the first time in her life. She cried and didn't cover her face. For the first time, she didn't hide. Yuna turned away and quickly ran her hand over her eyes. Torin stood like a rock, but his jaw was clenched so tightly that his jaw muscles were twitching. Tara pulled Bear close and cried along with Rena. The Deer brothers were silent. Kai, the teenage fox who wanted to take revenge on the whole world, stood in the back row and bit his lip. His eyes were shining. The old owl took off her thick glasses and wiped them with trembling hands. Little Naru walked up to Ri and hugged her. Naru was shorter than Rena. She wrapped her arms around Rena's waist and pressed herself close. Rena placed a hand on her head. She was still crying, but with her other hand, she was already holding the bell. Tightly, as if it would disappear if she let go. Junho stood and watched. He wasn't crying. Engineers don't cry. But something heavy sat in his throat and wouldn't go away. He had built bridges and houses and neighborhoods. He had designed structures that had withstood earthquakes. But nothing he had ever built was more important than this wooden swing in the yard of a small settlement at the edge of the world. Rena sat down on the swing. She pushed off. She flew. Snow swirled around her. The bell rang, and 37 people stood in the yard, watching as the little cat girl swung on the swing and laughed. She laughed. For the first time in her life, she laughed so loudly it could be heard beyond the fence. The sound reached the forest, and somewhere in the forest, something froze. Something ancient and attentive. It sensed that sound. Not laughter, not joy. It sensed that a place had appeared in the wastelands. A living place. A place that is growing. It turned its attention north and began to listen. The population of Ahen had grown to 37 people. Junho organized work crews and fired up the brick kiln, preparing to build stone walls. The settlement was named Ahen, which means here in the language of the beastfolk. Rena's birthday became a turning point of unity for all the residents. On the border of the Wastelands, something ancient and dangerous turned its attention to the growing settlement. Winter showed no mercy. The temperature dropped every week. The snow was knee-deep. The wind from the northwest battered the palisade and howled through the gaps between the stakes. The firewood was burning faster than Junho had anticipated. He recounted the supplies. At the current rate of consumption, they would last 5 weeks. Winter would last at least 8 weeks. A 3-week shortfall. Critical. He changed the heating plan. Instead of heating each house separately, he proposed a central heating system. 2 of the 7 houses became dormitories. All 37 people slept in 2 houses. Cramped, uncomfortable, but firewood consumption was cut by 2/3. The remaining 5 houses were heated only during the day and only those used for work. The smithy, the workshop, the warehouse. Yuna was outraged. She said that sleeping all crammed together wasn't a life but a pigsty. Junho replied that a pigsty is warm, but a grave is cold.
Yuna fell silent. Then she snorted. Then she said he could at least apologize for the comparison. He didn't apologize. But that evening he built wooden partitions in the sleeping quarters. Not very high, waist high.
They didn't provide warmth or create separate rooms, but they gave the illusion of personal space. And sometimes an illusion is more important than reality. Torin forged. Every day. Soft iron came from the bog ore. Not steel, but enough for nails and hinges and knives and shovel heads. Every iron tool sped up the work. A stone axe chops down a tree in 20 minutes. An iron one in 5. A fourfold difference. Multiplied by 6 lumberjacks in 30 days, that's the difference between survival and death from the cold. The one-armed apprentice named Varen turned out to be a godsend. He had lost his right arm but was left-handed. His left arm pumped the bellows with metronomic precision. Thorin said the lad had a better sense of rhythm than any two-handed apprentice. Varen smiled for the first time in months. In the 3rd week of winter, the problem Junho had been expecting but hoping to postpone arrived. Yes, supplies were dwindling. Yuna was doing everything she could. Dried roots, jerky, nuts, frozen fish from the stream. But 37 people is a lot. The children ate less but needed more. Growing bodies require nourishment. Bear had lost weight. His round cheeks had hollowed out. Tara looked at her son and said nothing. The silence was more terrifying than any words. Junho made a decision. He sent the brothers on a big hunt, far away, beyond their usual range. The system showed a herd of wild deer 3 kilometers to the west. The brothers left at dawn. They returned 2 days later, with 2 carcasses and news. They had found a frozen lake, fish under the ice, lots of fish. The lake was 2 kilometers away, far for daily treks through the snow. But fish means protein. Protein means life. Junho organized a fishing crew. 4 people. Every morning they walked to the lake, chopped the ice, set the nets that Torin had woven, returned in the evening, wet, frozen, but with fish. The system tossed out an idea. A glacier blueprint. An underground storage facility for freezing and storing food. Cost, 2 points. He unlocked it, dug a 2 by 2 meter pit, 1.5 meters deep. I lined the walls with stone. On top, a log cover buried in earth. Inside, the temperature stayed below 0 even when it warmed up slightly outside. The fish kept for weeks. The meat didn't spoil. The food supply began to grow instead of dwindling. The blue panel flashed, plus 2 points for the glacier. A 700-meter radius of view. New details appeared on the map. Junho unfolded it and froze. In the southeast, 600 meters away, black dots. Not 3 like last time. 12. 12 monsters. They weren't moving. They were standing still, as if they were waiting. He called Emily. No, Emily wasn't there yet. She'd be coming later. He called Torin. The old man hobbled over to the gate and listened. 12 hounds, 600 meters away, standing still. Torin rubbed his chin. He said that hounds don't stand still. Hounds either hunt or sleep. If they're standing, it means they're waiting for a command. Waiting for a command. Junho asked again. Torin nodded. He said that in the old days, before the end of the war, the monsters from the abyss had begun to act together. Not like beasts, like an army. Then the war ended, and they scattered into solitary individuals. But if they're waiting for orders again,
It means something has changed. Something has awakened. Junho looked to the south. The forest was silent. The snow fell steadily. Nothing moved. But 12 black dots stood and waited. He made a decision. Reinforce the stockade immediately. Kai turned out to be unexpectedly useful. The teenage fox who wanted revenge turned out to be the best tracker after the deer brothers. His fox senses were sharper. He found traces of the monsters around the palisade every morning. Claw marks on the trees. Urine marks on the rocks. They were marking their territory, encircling them. Junho began building a second line of defense. A moat. Not deep, 1.5 meters, half a meter wide, along the outer perimeter of the palisade. It was hard to dig, but 20 pairs of hands managed it in 4 days. He ordered sharpened stakes to be driven into the bottom of the ditch. Torin forged them from iron. Small, sharp. They're invisible under a thin layer of snow. Yuna looked at the stakes and shuddered. She said it was cruel. Junho replied that cruel it is when 12 monsters enter a settlement where children are sleeping. Yuna said nothing, but she helped cover the moat with snow. The attack came at night. Not in a week, not in 3 days. That very night. As if the monsters knew the moat had just been finished and they had to attack while the people were tired. The old owl raised a "Bah!" Her cry cut through the silence. Everyone jumped up. The deer brothers with spears at the gate, Torin with a hammer by the wall, Kai with an axe on the platform, Junho on the observation deck, Rena with Bear and the other children in the dormitory. The door was closed, locked from the inside. They came out of the forest in a wave. Not 12, more. The system counted. 14, 16, 20, 23 black dots. They ran in silence. They didn't howl. They didn't growl. Silence. It was scarier than any howl. The first wave struck the palisade from the north. The stakes creaked. One was torn from the ground. A creature stuck its snout through the gap. Brother Deer struck with his spear, hit it in the eye. The creature yelped and recoiled. The second wave moved along the ditch. 3 hounds fell into the ditch onto the stakes. A shriek, a crunch. They thrashed at the bottom. 1 fell silent. 2 clawed their way out. Bloodied, furious, but slow. The iron stakes had done their job. The third wave found the junction with the slope, the very spot Junho had patched up after the first attack. The stones and clay held, but the hounds scraped and pushed. One began to over the top. Torin hurled a rock the size of a human head. It hit the creature. It tumbled backward. The wolfsmith threw rocks like nuts. The battle lasted 2 hours. By dawn, the hounds had retreated. Black blood and the bodies of 3 dead creatures remained in the snow. The palisade held. The moat worked. But Junho saw the damage. 2 stakes were torn out. 3 were tilted. A gap on the north side. Every attack would weaken the wall. Wood doesn't last forever. Wood rots under the snow and rain. He needs stone. He needs a real wall. And he needs more people. The system seemed to have heard him. Red dots appeared on the map 800 meters to the west. Lots of them. More than 20. Another group of exiles. They were heading toward Ahen. The smoke from the forge was visible for miles. They arrived by evening. 26 people. Among them were the wounded. Among them were children. And among them was a human woman
in a tattered cloak with a leather bag slung over her shoulder. Tall, thin, dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was tied back in a bun. Her hands were calloused, not from labor, from surgery. Calluses from instruments she held for hours on end. She approached the gate and looked at Junho. She introduced herself. Sehyun Lee, a doctor, a former doctor, from the capital, Vellaris, accused of treating beastmen, convicted. She had escaped from the convoy. She had been walking for 3 weeks, hungry, sick, but alive. She looked at the settlement, at the houses, at the smithy, at the palisade stained with the black blood of monsters. Then she looked at Junho and said he had 3 people with wounds that needed to be treated within the next hour, or infection would set in. She could tell by the way they moved, by the color of the skin around the bandages, by the smell. Junho pointed her to the house they were using as an infirmary. She went inside. A minute later, her voice rang out, sharp, commanding. She demanded clean water, bandage cloth, alcohol, or any strong disinfectant. Yuna brought her herbs. Sehyun looked at them, sniffed them, sorted through them. She selected 3 types. She set the rest aside. She said these 3 would help, but the rest would do more harm than good in this case. Yuna opened her mouth to object. Then she closed it. She watched Sehyun work. Her hands moved without hesitation. Every gesture was precise, not a single unnecessary movement. In an hour, she treated 3 wounded people. She cleaned their wounds. She stitched them up, bandaged them. The needle and thread were in her bag, the only thing she'd taken when she fled. A doctor's tools. When she finished, she went outside. She pulled a short pipe from her pocket, filled it with something from the pouch, lit it from a coal, took a drag. She exhaled. She looked at Junho. She said his settlement was wonderful, but that the infirmary was a disgrace. No light, no ventilation. The operating table was a tree stump. She said that if he wanted people to stop dying, she needed a proper room. Junho looked at her, tired, cynical, sharp. Her hands were covered in someone else's blood, a pipe clenched between her teeth. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She was exactly what he needed. He nodded. He said he would build her a hospital. Sehyun took a long drag on her pipe. She said she'd believe it when she saw it. The population of Ahen, 63 people. Winter set in, and Junho redesigned the heating system for communal living and built an ice house to store supplies. 23 monsters attacked the settlement at night, but the palisade and the moat with iron stakes held. A new group of 26 exiles, including Dr. Sehyun Lee, who immediately tended to the wounded. The population grew to 63 people. Junho spent 12 days building a hospital, not out of wood, out of brick. Ahen's first brick building. He fired the bricks in batches of 60. The kiln ran around the clock. Those on duty stoked the fire at night. Rena volunteered to keep track of the schedule. She drew up a duty roster and monitored its implementation with a seriousness that would have seemed comical if it hadn't worked perfectly. No one missed a single shift. A 10-year-old cat girl with a birch bark notebook and a charcoal pencil managed the schedule better than a middle manager. Junho poured lime mortar into the hospital's foundation. He burned the limestone in a kiln, ground it, mixed it with sand and water. The mortar set slowly in the cold, but it set. The walls rose row by row, brick by brick, mortar between them, evenly, tightly. The system suggested the thickness of the joints, the optimal reinforcement.
the locations for the window openings. But Junho did the most important part himself. He designed the hospital not as a building. He designed it for a specific person. For 3 evenings he watched Sehyun work, how she stands, which hand she uses to pick up tools, which way she turns most often, where she needs light. He placed the operating table by the south window. Maximum daylight falls on the work area. The table's height is tailored to her height, not standard, hers. The instrument shelves are within arm's reach, her left arm. Because Sehyun is right-handed, but picks up instruments with her left and works with her right. He noticed this on the second evening of observation. Ventilation comes through 2 windows located opposite each other, a controlled draft. Open one window for a light breeze. Open both for a strong draft. The smells of blood and medicine don't linger. The floor is stone, not dirt. Stone can be washed. Dirt cannot. Hygiene. Basic, but critical. 2 entrances, one standard, one wide and low, for large beastmen. For bears who find it uncomfortable to crouch through a standard doorway. For future winged ones, if they come. Every detail for a specific user. When the building was ready, Junho called Sehyun. She came in with a pipe in her teeth and a skeptical expression on her face. She stepped inside. She stopped. She looked at the table. She touched the surface. Smooth stone, polished to a matte sheen. She looked at the shelves. She reached out with her left hand. Her fingers rested precisely on the edge of the shelf. Effortless. No strain. Perfect height. She turned toward the window. The light fell evenly on the table. No shadows. No glare. She looked at the second entrance. Low. Wide. For those whom other buildings won't let in. The cigarette in her mouth went out. She didn't notice. She stood in the middle of the room and was silent. For a long time. Then she turned to Junho, who was standing in the doorway. She said 4 words. She said, "He built this. For her." He replied with 2. He said, "Who else?" Sehyun turned away. Quickly. But he'd seen it. Her red eyes grew even redder. Not from lack of sleep. She ran her hand over her face, took out the cigarette, lit it again. Her hands trembled slightly. She took a drag, exhaled. Said she needed an assistant, and that the hospital needed a name. Junho said she would choose the assistant herself, and the name too. Sehyun was silent for a long time. Then she said 1 word. Anchor. Anchor Hospital. Because when you're being swept away, an anchor is the only thing that keeps you in place. Junho nodded. Torin forged a sign, a small one, iron, with the letters stamped into it. Anchor. They hung it above the entrance. The blue panel lit up. The structure was complete. A brick hospital. Excellent quality. Excellent for the first time. Design points. +8. The sense of material skill was improved. It now recognizes organic materials. Range, 1 kilometer. 8 points for a single building. Because the quality was excellent. Because every detail had been thought through. The system rewarded not for quantity, but for quality. Not for size, but for the precision of the design. Junho understood the principle. To build not a building, but a response to the needs of a specific person. That is architecture. Winter dragged on, but Ahen held on. Sehyun took charge of the health of all 63 people. She examined each one. She compiled a list of issues, 3 with chronic wounds, 5 showing signs of exhaustion, 2 children with rickets, 1 elderly man with a heart condition. She developed a diet plan. She told Yuna which herbs to gather and in what proportions to add to the food. Yuna bristled at first. She considered herself an expert on herbs. And here comes a human woman with a pipe and starts giving orders. But after a week, Yuna saw the results. The children stopped coughing. The wounds were healing faster. The old man with the heart condition began going out for walks. Yuna came to see Sehyun that evening. She sat down silently beside her. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she had been wrong. Sehyun took a long drag on her pipe and replied that Yuna hadn't been wrong. She had been proud. And those are 2 different things. Yuna smiled. From that day on, they worked together. The herbalist and the surgeon. Local knowledge and the scientific method. Together, they were stronger than apart. Like bricks and mortar. By midwinter, Junho had saved up enough points for the mill blueprint. 10 points. The mill required a water wheel. A water wheel required a constant flow. The stream froze over in winter, but water flowed beneath the ice. He designed a system. A dam upstream creates head. A canal brings water to the wheel. The wheel turns the millstone via a wooden shaft and gears. The millstone consists of 2 stone discs carved from limestone. The gears were a problem. Wood wears down. The teeth needed to be made of something stronger. Torin forged iron pins, small cylinders that were inserted into the wooden gears. They withstood 10 times better than plain wood. Building the mill took 3 weeks. It was the most complex structure Junho had ever built here. Lots of moving parts, tight tolerances. The wheel had to turn freely, but not wobble. The shaft had to transmit power without loss. The millstones had to be parallel with a 2-millimeter gap. He assembled and disassembled and assembled again. The system helped with the calculations. Torin helped with the ironwork. The Deer brothers helped with their muscle power. Rena helped by bringing him food when he forgot to eat, which happened regularly. On launch day, all of Ahen gathered by the stream. 63 people stood on the bank and watched the wooden wheel. Junho opened the sluice gate. Water gushed through the channel. It struck the blades. The wheel creaked. It turned. Slowly. With a groan. Then faster. Even faster. The shaft spun. The gears meshed. The millstone began to turn. Yuna poured a handful of grain into the hopper, wild grain she had found in an abandoned field and gathered all autumn. The grain poured between the millstones. The stone hummed, and flour flowed from the gap between the stones. White, fine, real flour. Silence. Then Torin said one word. He said, "Impossible." Then he fell silent. Then he said another word. "Beautiful." Sehyun stood to the side with her pipe extinguished and watched the wheel. She had seen mills before. There were mills in Vellaris, but they were hand-powered. Slaves turned the millstones. Here, water turned them. Yuna stood with flour on her palms and couldn't take her eyes off it. Rena came over and touched the flour with her finger. She tasted it on her tongue. Her ears pricked up. She turned to Junho, and in her green eyes was that very expression. The impossible had become possible. That evening, Yuna baked bread. The first bread in Ahen. Coarse, flat, unleavened, without yeast or salt. but it was bread. Hot bread fresh from the oven.
They broke it into 63 pieces, one piece for each person. Some ate in silence, some cried. Tara gave her piece to Bear. Bear took a bite and chewed with his eyes closed. Kai stood to the side, holding his piece in his hands. He didn't eat, he just held it. Then he sat down on the ground and began to eat slowly, crumb by crumb, stretching it out. Rena ate her piece down to the last crumb and sat with empty hands for a long time. Then she looked at Junho. She didn't say anything, but he knew what she was thinking. She thought it was all real, that it wasn't a dream, that the bread was real and warm, and that there would be more tomorrow. The blue panel flashed. Construction complete. Watermill. Excellent quality. Design points, +10. New skill unlocked. Blueprint for a stone wall. Available. 10 points. For 1 mill. Because the mill wasn't just a building. It was a turning point. The moment when a settlement stops merely surviving and begins to live. Junho built a brick hospital designed specifically for Sehyun Lee and received his first excellent quality rating with 8 design points. Sehyun and Yuna overcame their initial tension and began working together. A watermill was built, and the first loaf of Ahen bread was baked. The blueprint for a stone wall was unlocked. Spring arrived like a thaw. The snow melted, the stream swelled and burst its banks. Junho had been expecting this. He had dug drainage ditches in advance so that the water would not flood the buildings. The ditches worked. Not a single house was damaged. Torin looked at the drainage ditches and shook his head. He said that in the past, the villages used to flood every spring. But this man had simply dug holes in the right places, and the water went where it was supposed to. Junho replied that they weren't holes, but a drainage system, and that it was 3,000 years old. Torin asked how he knew that. Junho remained silent. With the arrival of spring, the stream of exiles grew stronger. The Lari launched a new wave of purges. Now they were expelling not only beastmen, but also people who refused to participate in the expulsions. People who hid their beastman neighbors. People who simply asked questions. Every week, 10, 15, 20 people arrived at the gates of Ahen. By the end of the second month of spring, the population had reached 120. The area inside the palisade was getting cramped. Junho realized they needed to expand. Not just build houses behind the palisade, to build for real, with a plan, with streets, with zoning. He activated the settlement planner at full power. He stood on a hill above Ahen and closed his eyes. The system unfolded a map, complete topography within a kilometer's radius. Every hill, every ravine, every watercourse. Deposits of stone, clay, and ore. Wind directions by season. Angles of sunlight at different times of the year. He saw it all. And he saw the city. Not the one that stood there now. The one that would stand there. The main street from the gate to the square. Wide, straight, with drainage ditches. Residential quarters on both sides. Houses in 2 rows. Passages between the rows. The blacksmith's quarter to the west. The leeward side. Smoke and heat drift away from the homes. The market in the square. An open space for trade and gatherings. The hospital near the center. Equidistant from any point in the city. A school on the eastern side. Morning sun. Children study in the best light. Fields outside the city to the south. A slope facing the sun. Good soil.
and a wall. A stone wall around the entire perimeter. A circle with a diameter of 400 meters. 4 meters high, 1 meter thick. Towers every 50 meters. Double gates with bars. He opened his eyes. His hands were shaking. Not from the cold, from the scale of it all. He had just designed a city. A real city. In his head. In 10 minutes. Because he had been designing cities his whole life. Only now the design wasn't on a computer screen, it was on the ground beneath his feet, and it had to be built by hand. 120 pairs of hands. He had spent 20 points on the blueprint for a stone wall. He had 13 left. The wall's design was detailed. The foundation, the masonry, the buttresses, the battlements, the towers, the drainage, every detail. The system gave him knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries on Earth. Roman walls, medieval castles, the science of fortification from Vauban to modern bunkers, all translated into the language of local materials and technologies. He began building the wall with the foundation. A trench around the perimeter, 1 meter deep, 1.5 meters wide. 120 people worked in 3 shifts, morning, afternoon, evening. Each shift lasted 8 hours. Junho drew up the schedule. Rena oversaw its execution. Her birch bark notebook grew thicker. She wrote everything down. Who worked, how many hours, who was sick, who needed rest. A 10-year-old girl kept the city's personnel records. Ahen monitored the workers' health. She established a rule. Every worker must drink water every hour, must eat 3 times a day. They were required to sleep at least 6 hours. Anyone who broke the rules was personally removed from their shift by her. Yuna provided food. In the spring, the forest came alive. Mushrooms, berries, young shoots, wild garlic. The fish in the stream went to spawn. The deer brothers set nets and brought back full baskets every day. Yuna laid out the first garden beds, a vegetable garden inside the old stockade. Onions, turnips, carrots. She found the seeds in that same abandoned field to the south. Grain that had survived in the ground after 200 years of neglect. Tenacious grain, just like the people who planted it. Torin forged without stopping. Tools, nails, staples, hinges, saw blades. He trained 3 apprentices. Varen, the one-armed man, worked the bellows and sorted the ore. 2 young beastmen of the bull race were learning to forge. Slowly, clumsily. But they were learning. The smithy worked from dawn to dusk. The clang of hammers became the voice of Ahen. The wall grew, row by row, brick and stone and mortar. Buttresses every 10 meters. An internal staircase to climb the wall. Loopholes every 3 meters. Drainage holes at the base so water wouldn't erode the foundation. Junho supervised every section. He checked every joint. He adjusted every corner. He slept no more than 5 hours a day. Sehyon scolded him. She said he would collapse and then construction would come to a halt. He replied that he wouldn't collapse. She replied that everyone says that until they do. He kept working. By the end of the 3rd month, the wall had reached 1.5 meters, half the planned height. The towers had been laid out but not yet completed. The gate existed as an opening with a temporary barricade. 2 months of work remained. It was then that the scout arrived. A lone rider appeared at the southern edge of the forest. The horse was tired. The man wore a Vellaris uniform, a gray cloak, the kingdom's coat of arms on his chest, a sword at his belt. He looked at Ahen, at the wall, at the houses, at the smoke from the smithy, at the people working, at the beastmen walking freely. The Deer brothers spotted him first. They raised the alarm. Kai grabbed a spear and ran toward the gate. His eyes were burning. Vellaris. The enemy. His father's killer. Junho stopped Kai. He placed a hand on his shoulder. Kai struggled back, but he stopped. Junho went out through the gate, alone, unarmed. He approached the horseman. The scout looked down at him. Young, about 20, frightened. He hadn't expected to find a city here. He'd expected to find corpses, or, at best, a handful of ragged survivors. Instead, he found a wall, a smithy, and 120 people. Junho spoke calmly. He said the scout could return and tell what he had seen. He could tell that there was a settlement in the Wastelands, that it was growing, that its inhabitants were not starving or dying. The scout listened with his mouth agape. Junho handed him a bundle. Inside the bundle was a loaf of bread. Real bread, made from milled flour. Hot, fresh from the oven. The scout took it. He looked at the bread, then at Junho. Then he turned his horse around and rode off, without looking back. Torin stood at the gate and shook his head. He said that Junho had just invited a wolf into the sheepfold. That now Vellaris knew where they were. That now the army would come. Junho nodded. He said that the army would come anyway. The smoke from the forge was visible for miles. Sooner or later they would have found them. Better that they know this is a city, not a group of victims. Thorn was silent for a long time. Then he asked if the wall was ready for a siege. Junho looked at the 5-foot wall, at the unfinished towers, at the makeshift barricade in place of the gate. He replied that no, it wasn't ready. But it would be. Work picked up speed. Not because Junho ordered it, because everyone had seen the scout. Everyone understood what that meant. Vellaris knows. Vellaris is coming. And when he comes, the wall must stand. People worked from dawn till dusk. Kai, who just a month ago had wanted revenge, was now hauling stones until his hands were covered in bloody blisters. His revenge had taken shape. Not a sword. A wall. A wall that would tell Vellaris that these people were no longer victims. In a month, the wall reached 3 meters. In a month and a half, 4. The towers went up. 4 towers around the perimeter. Square, with loopholes on 3 sides, with observation platforms. A gate. A double gate. Oak doors reinforced with iron strips. Behind the gate, a lattice of iron bars that Torn had been forging for 2 weeks. In front of the wall, a moat, wider and deeper than the first. 3 meters wide, 2 meters deep, with a drawbridge on chains. The blue panel flashed as the last stone fell into place. The structure is complete. A stone wall with towers. Excellent quality. Design points, +20. Viewing radius, 2 kilometers. Skill improved. Settlement planner, level 2. The aqueduct blueprint is available. 20 points. Beyond the wall, Junho stood atop the southern tower and looked out at his city. Ahen. 120 people. A stone wall 4 meters high. A smithy, a hospital, a mill, a school that the old teacher had opened in one of the houses, vegetable gardens, fishing grounds, the road from the gate to the square. Rena stood nearby. She had grown over these months, thinner, taller, more serious. She had traded her birch-bark notebook for a leather one sewn by the wolf seamstress. In the notebook were the names of all 120 residents, their roles, their illnesses, their birthdays. Rena knew everyone, by name, by face, by habits. She had become Ahen's memory. She looked at him and said the wall was beautiful. He replied that the wall was functional. Beauty was a bonus. Rena smiled slightly. She said he had a strange sense of beauty. He didn't argue. With the arrival of spring, Ahen's population had grown to 120 people, and Junho had drawn up a complete plan of the city with zoning and streets. Construction of a 4-meter-high stone wall with 4 towers and double gates had begun and been completed. A Vellaris scout discovered the settlement, and Junho sent him away with bread, knowing that an army was now inevitable. 20 design points were earned, and the aqueduct blueprint was unlocked. The scout returned 3 weeks later, not alone. A detachment followed him, 50 soldiers, mounted, in Vellaris's gray cloaks. An officer rode at the head, shining armor, a tall helmet, a long spear with a banner. They emerged from the forest and stopped 200 meters from the wall. The officer looked at Ahen. His face was visible from the tower. Surprise, anger, confusion. He had expected to see a refugee camp. He saw a city with a wall taller than some of the Vellaris garrisons. Junho stood on the wall. Beside him stood Torin and Kai and the Deer brothers and 20 more armed residents. Armed, relatively speaking. Spears, bows, axes. Against trained soldiers in armor, it was little. But they stood, and they did not hide. The officer rode forward. He stopped at the moat. He looked at the moat, at the drawbridge, at the wall, at the battlements. He shouted up. He demanded that the leader of the rebels come out and surrender. He demanded that the fugitive beastmen return to Vellaris territory for resettlement, reassignment. Junho knew what that meant. Execution, or slavery, or both. He answered from the wall, calmly, without shouting. His voice carried well in the morning air. He said that Ahen was not Vellaris territory, that the wastes were no man's land under the Treaty of the 7 Kingdoms, that the inhabitants of Ahen were not rebels, but settlers on free land, and that if the officer wished to discuss this further, he could come alone and unarmed, and he would be served lunch. The officer flushed. He wasn't used to being spoken to as an equal, especially by an outcast from a walled settlement in the middle of the wildlings. He gave the order. 50 horsemen dismounted. They brought out ladders, assault shields. They moved toward the wall. Junho had been waiting for this. He had been preparing for 3 weeks. The moat was the first line of defense. 3 meters wide, 2 meters deep. The drawbridge was raised. The soldiers dragged the ladders over and began throwing them across the moat. The first ladder was laid down. A soldier ran up it. The ladder broke. Not from the weight. There was nothing beneath it. Junho had cut away the opposite edge of the trench. The outer wall looked solid, but had been undermined from the inside. A thin layer of earth and turf. Under a man's weight, it gave way. A soldier fell into the trench. A second followed him. A third managed to jump back. Screams. Curses. The officer ordered them to find a spot where the ditch was narrower. The ditch was the same width all around the perimeter. 3 meters. Everywhere. without exception. The soldiers circled the wall. They found a section where the wall met the hillside. That very spot. The old Achilles' heel. But now, there was a tower there. And in front of the tower, the slope was covered in water that had turned to ice overnight. Smooth. Slippery. The soldiers in heavy armor couldn't climb up. They slid down. They fell on top of each other. Third attempt. Ladders against the wall. The wall was 4 meters high.
The soldiers' ladders were 3 meters long. They didn't reach the top. They were used to wooden palisades 2 meters high. The 4-meter stone wall came as a surprise to them. Those who did manage to reach the top were met by a stream of boiling water. The youths and women were heating water over fires behind the wall and pouring it down from above. Not oil, not tar, water, hot enough to burn their hands and force them to let go of the ladder. Not hot enough to kill. Junho had insisted on that. He didn't want to kill them. He wanted them to leave, alive and with a story to tell about what had happened. The battle, if you could call it that, lasted 4 hours. Not a single soldier made it over the wall. 7 were wounded. 2 broke their legs in the moat. The officer stood 200 meters away, watching his unit, which couldn't take the wall. His face was ashen. He gave the order to retreat. 50 soldiers gathered the wounded and went back into the forest. On the southern tower, 30 men stood and watched them go. In silence. No one shouted. No one rejoiced. They just stood there and watched the army leave. The first army in their lives to leave empty-handed. Torin stood next to Junho, breathing heavily. His leg hurt. He leaned on his hammer, but his face bore an expression that Junho would remember forever. The old wolf was smiling. Not with bared teeth, not maliciously. Quietly, with relief. Like a man who had waited his whole life for something and had finally gotten it. He said the wall had worked. Junho nodded. The wall had worked. But he was thinking of something else. 50 soldiers was a reconnaissance in force. Vellaris was checking what was here. Now they know. And next time, they'll send not 50, but 500, or 3,000. He needs time. He needs more people. He needs allies beyond the wastes. After the soldiers retreated, something changed in Ahen. Not on the outside, on the inside. People walked differently, spoke differently, louder, more freely. Children played in the street and no one scolded them. Kai, who had stood on the wall with a spear for 4 hours straight, didn't look angry for the first time in 6 months. He looked calm. The anger was gone. Not because he had taken revenge, because he had protected. The difference was enormous. Revenge is empty. Protection fills you up. Yuna came to Junho in the evening. She sat down next to him by the fire and was silent for a long time. Then she said that when she was pouring boiling water from the wall, she was thinking about her village, about how the soldiers came and burned everything down, about how she ran and heard the screams. And today she was standing on the wall and the soldiers were below. And she could have hated them, but instead, she heated water. Not oil, not tar, water. Because the man who built this wall said he didn't want to kill. And she listened. And now she feels something strange. Not joy, not satisfaction, something quieter, something like what she lost when the village burned down. She couldn't put a name to it. Junho said maybe it was called dignity.